Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Munib Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. The global number of COVID-19 cases has crossed 16 million with more than 644,000 deaths. This comes as the US recorded more than 68,000 infections in the last 24 hours, while the country's death toll rose by 1,067 to over 146,000. The virus continues to batter Latin America, with Brazil reporting 1,211 more deaths and over 51,000 infections. Elsewhere in Pakistan, 35 more people have died. The death toll in the country has risen to 5,822, while the number of cases has topped 273,000. Meanwhile, North Korea has declared a state of emergency and placed the city of Kaesong under lockdown. The United Nations says terrorist groups operating from Afghanistan are targeting Pakistan. In its 26th report, the Analytical Support and Sanctions Monitoring Team of the UN said the banned Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and its splinter group Jamaat al-Ahrar have their bases in Afghanistan. The report said the two groups are responsible for the killing of innocent civilians in various acts of terrorism inside Pakistan. Thousands of Israelis continue to rally outside Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's residence in Jerusalem. The demonstrators are calling for Netanyahu to resign over corruption charges and his mishandling of the new coronavirus pandemic. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, the global number of COVID-19 cases has crossed 16 million with more than 644,000 deaths. This comes as the US recorded more than 68,000 infections in the last 24 hours, while the country's death toll rose by 1,067 to over 146,000. The resurgence of the new coronavirus in the Americas and now in parts of Europe and Middle East has alarmed the entire world. Australia's Victoria has recorded over 450 new coronavirus cases and 10 deaths in the country's deadliest day from the pandemic. The second coming of the virus in the once worst hit Spain has forced UK to reimpose travel restrictions to prevent cross-border spread. The coronavirus pandemic continues to ravage the Latin America as healthcare systems are starting to crumble under the pressure. Brazil remains region's worst hit country with over 86,000 deaths, while the confirmed cases are approaching 2.4 million. Brazil's health ministry reported 1,211 deaths and over 51,000 new infections in the past 24 hours. Elsewhere, Mexico's official tally stands at over 385,000 infections and over 42,000 deaths due to the contagion. Meanwhile, Peru has registered just under 18,000 deaths, while there are almost 376,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. Ecuador's Ministry of Public Health said the country has over 80,000 confirmed cases, with the death toll topping 5,500. Over in Chile, the Health Ministry reported that the total number of cases in the country has risen to over 343,000, with over 9,000 deaths. Meanwhile, Pakistan has reported 35 deaths from the coronavirus in the past 24 hours, raising the total to 5,822. The Health Ministry says 1,226 new cases were reported overnight as the tally crossed 273,000. Officials said over 237,000 people have recovered from the virus so far. The ministry said there are now over 29,000 active cases in the country. It said 1,267 people are in a critical condition. Sindh is the worst hit province with over 117,000 infections, while Punjab has nearly 92,000 cases. Moving on now, the United Nations says terrorist groups operating from Afghanistan are targeting Pakistan. In its 26th report, the Analytical Support and Sanctions Monitoring Team of the UN said the banned Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and its splinter group Jamaat al-Ahrar have their bases in Afghanistan. The report said the two groups are responsible for the killing of innocent civilians in various acts of terrorism inside Pakistan. It states the ISIL Khorasan considers Afghan territory a base for spreading terrorist influence across the wider region. Now over to Afghanistan, where 2 soldiers have been killed and 3 others wounded in a car bomb blast in southern Helmand province. Local officials said 2 bombs detonated close to the security checkpoints in southern Nahr-e-Siraj district. Provincial governor's spokesman said the forces had prior information about explosions. No group has claimed responsibility for the blasts yet. Thousands of Israelis continue to rally outside Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's residence in Jerusalem. Police used water cannons and have detained over a dozen protesters. Netanyahu's trial resumed this month on the charges of fraud, breach of trust and accepting briberies. The demonstrators are calling for Netanyahu to resign over alleged corruption and his mishandling of the new coronavirus pandemic. In almost daily demonstrations, they are demanding better state aid amid reimposed COVID-19 curbs after a spike in new cases. Now, Lebanon claims Israel has violated its airspace at least 29 times in the last 48 hours. In a statement, the Lebanese army said all violations are being monitored in coordination with the UN Lebanon peacekeeping mission. State media said Israeli forces have been operating drones over the southern Hula province. Israel has not yet commented on the claims yet. In recent months, Lebanon and Israel have made accusations that counter accusations about land, air and maritime space violations. Now, in the United States, 1 person has been shot dead in a Black Lives protest in Austin, Texas. The police say several shots were fired at the demonstrations as a group of about 100 people was marching and chanting slogans. In a briefing, the police said they have detained a suspect. Meanwhile, federal agents fired tear gas to disperse the crowd in Portland as the protests against racism and police brutality continue for the 59th day. Elsewhere in Seattle, police arrested 45 people as 21 officers got injured in clashes with the protesters. Over in Colorado, at least 2 people were injured as a vehicle barreled through demonstrators gathered on a highway in Aurora. Protests against systemic racism and police violence have engulfed the country since the custodial murder of African-American George Floyd in May. Venezuela has slammed the U.S. decision to close China's consulate in Houston. In a tweet, Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza said the move was an act of baseless aggression. Arreaza said Washington's wide-ranging escalations against Beijing were based on falsehood. He said the escalations were a part of U.S. President Donald Trump's attempt to alleviate his electoral struggles. Early on Friday, Beijing ordered the closure of a U.S. consulate in Chengdu in response to Washington's demand to close Beijing's Houston consulate. The bilateral ties between both nations have worsened this year over a range of issues, including coronavirus, South China Sea, Hong Kong, and global trade. Meanwhile, China says it will respond to the intrusion of U.S. federal agents into its consulate general compound in Houston. A spokesperson for the Chinese Foreign Ministry said American agents cannot intrude the consulate in any way under international laws. Wang Wenbin said the consulate is not only a diplomatic compound but also a Chinese national property. Earlier, U.S. government ordered China to close its consulate in Houston, accusing it of spying. Meanwhile, a Singaporean man has pleaded guilty to conducting espionage in the U.S. for China. U.S. officials say John Wei Yeo was charged with his using political consultancy in America as a front to collect information for Chinese intelligence. Over to Spain, where protesters have rallied against monarchy amid corruption allegations against the former King Juan Carlos, fathers of King Felipe's. Demonstrators gathered in Madrid while keeping a distance from each other. In June, the country's Supreme Court opened an investigation into Juan Carlos' alleged involvement with a rail contract in Saudi Arabia. This came after a Swiss newspaper reported Carlos had illegally received $100 million from the late Saudi king. Juan Carlos has repeatedly declined to comment on the allegations, which has further enraged the protesters.
Now more than ever, amid a health crisis, a crisis of the system, we have a head of state who is stealing in front of our faces is even more outrageous than ever. We had to come here to prove it.
France is probing alleged crimes against humanity by a top former Rwandan military official during the country's 1994 genocide. Prosecutors say a preliminary investigation was opened after Ndivie Gabo was found hiding in the city of Orleans, southwest of Paris. The International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda has identified Ndivie Gabo as one of the architects of the genocide. This comes 2 months after another suspected genocide architect, Félicien Kabuga, was arrested on the fringes of Paris. The genocide in Rwanda claimed lives of 800,000 people, most of them being of Tutsi ethnicity and moderate Hutus. Britain says it will boost its ability to handle threats posed by Russia and China in space. Defense Secretary Ben Wallace says this is part of a foreign security and defense policy review being conducted by the UK government. London said it was concerned about a Russian satellite test which involved the launch of a projectile with the characteristics of a weapon. Wallace said the test was a reminder of the threat Russia poses to United Kingdom's national security. He added that China also poses a similar threat by developing offensive space weapons. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. In the United States, 3 people have been killed after a small plane carrying 6 passengers crashed in a residential area in Utah. Police said a 9-month-old baby, a woman and the pilot were killed in the crash in West Jordan neighborhood. Police said a woman and a 2-year-old child are hospitalized while a boy was treated and released. A 72-year-old woman who suffered burns was the only person injured on the ground as 3 houses sustained damage. The Federal Aviation Administration said the plane came down under unknown circumstances after taking off from a regional airport in West Jordan. The FAA and the National Transportation Safety Board have launched an inquiry into the crash. Meanwhile, in Germany, 3 people have died after a small aircraft crashed into a home in the northwestern town of Wessel. Police said the roof of the apartment building in the town caught fire after the plane crashed into it. Police said the aircraft had taken off from Marl airfield. It said the cause of the incident is still unclear and the pilot has not been found yet either. Police said the micro-light aircraft was carrying 2 people. At least 24 Rohingya migrants are feared to have drowned just off the Malaysian coast. Coast Guard officials said only 1 among the 24 on board have survived. Chief Coast Guard Zabawi Abdullah said the only surviving migrant swam to the shore and was apprehended by the authorities. He said search and rescue operations including 2 aircraft and boats has been launched. Abdullah said no other survivors or bodies have been found yet. Authorities in Malaysia have recently been trying to stop Rohingya migrants from entering the country due to fears of coronavirus. The policy has sparked anger and outrage from rights groups. Now, over 7,000 personnel of India's top 3 paramilitary forces have contracted COVID-19. Thousands of troops reasonable for border security have been redeployed for pandemic treatment. The worst hit among India's paramilitary forces is the Border Security Force, which guards the borders with Pakistan and Bangladesh. Over 3,000 cases have been confirmed in BSF so far, killing 10 of them. A Health Ministry spokesperson said the number of active cases within the four stands at 1,370. Meanwhile, more than 1,500 Central Reserve Police Force are also infected, with 15 personnel dying from the disease. Nearly 49,000 more cases were recorded in the country over the past 24 hours. 2011, he was retiring from the weekday show after hosting it for more than 25 years. He also presented the US version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. He was inducted into the Television Hall of Fame in 2006 and received a Hollywood Walk of Fame star in 2003. US President Donald Trump retweeted his condolences, calling Philbin one of the greats. Now, against a backdrop of an 18th century castle, singer Evelyn Zoe rode amidst water lilies as a pianist Cecile voters played classics on her floating piano. More about this unique show in this report.
The French band Piano du Lac feared for the worst this year, unsure when they would perform again after the COVID-19 lockdown forced them to cancel 2 tours. But the group made a gamble this summer season and started touring mid-July to masked and socially distant audience. Jean-François Marquis, the owner of the Riqueberg Castle in northern France, welcomed the group for a 2-night run of their show Melting Flottaire to show his support.
This year, we are welcoming the Piano du Lac once more, whom we decided to support during this difficult period. So we are welcoming them here at Riqueberg Castle. There are a lot of health safety rules to observe, but if we don't support the artists, what will happen to them?
The band member Voters aims to bring classical music to the countryside, where the concert halls are not widespread, and gained a stronger audience this time.
I think there is an ambience that is, well, not electric, but as for me, I'm so moved this year, much more than the other years, to see an audience in front of me who came despite the situation.
The French government has extended income support for the arts and culture industry and acknowledged their difficulties amid COVID-19 pandemic.
Now, domestic pilgrims have arrived in Muslims' holy city of Mecca ahead of this year's Hajj amid COVID-19 restrictions. This year will be the first in modern era when pilgrims from outside of the kingdom will not be able to attend the pilgrimage. Health Ministry officials said all domestic pilgrims have been thoroughly checked for any symptoms of the coronavirus. This year's Hajj has been limited to about 1,000 people, all of whom are residents of the kingdom. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Group has reaffirmed the prioritization of economic recovery from the COVID-19 outbreak. This comes after a virtual meeting chaired by the group chaired Malaysia to discuss the prioritization of economic recovery. Malaysia's Trade and Industry Minister Mohammed Azmin Ali said the meeting aimed to respond to the challenges posed by COVID-19. He said Malaysia also hopes to enact the APEC post-2020 vision by the end of the year. APEC is a regional economic forum established in 1989 to leverage the growing interdependence of the Asia-Pacific. With a combined population of 3 billion, the 21 APEC economies account for around 60% of the world's total gross domestic product. Gulf stock markets are trading mixed. Investors, especially energy companies, declined, fearing re-emergence of the travel restrictions due to the recent global COVID-19 surge. Saudi Arabia's benchmark index dipped due to Saudi Aramco's fall and an almost 2% drop for Rabigh Refining and Petrochemical Company. The Bay's main share index gained marginally, with lender Emirates NBD rising over 0.5% and Emaar Properties up nearly 0.5%. In Abu Dhabi, the index edged up fractionally, helped by a 4.5% jump in aquaculture company International Holding. The Qatari index traded flat as petrochemicals company Industrious Qatar traded over 1%. Well, now in cricket, West Indies have scored 159 for the loss of 6 wickets in the first innings after play resumed on day 3 of the third Test match against England at Manchester's Old Trafford. The Islanders ended day 2 at 137 for 6 to trail England by 232 runs after restricting the host to 369 runs in the first innings. At stumps, Shane Dulwich and Jason Holder were unbeaten on the crease as only John Campbell offered some resistance with his 32. Pace Stewart, James Anderson and Stuart Broad took 2 to destroy the West Indian top order. Earlier, Oli Pop scored with 91 runs and Broad made a quick-fire 62. The 3-match series is evenly poised at 1-1. Now, Inter Milan beat relegation threatened Genoa by 3-0 at the Luigi Ferrari Stadium. A Romelu Lukaku brace and a goal from Alexis Sanchez moved the Nerazzurri up into second place, 4 points behind leaders Juventus. With his 22nd and 23rd goals of the season, Lukaku is the first Inter player since 1950 to score 15 away goals in a single Serie A campaign. The result leaves Genoa in 17th place with 36 points, 4 clear of the drop zone, having played 1 more game than 18th place Lecce. Elsewhere, Sassuolo lost to Napoli by 2-0 after having 4 goals ruled out at San Paolo Stadium. El Said Haissad's first goal for the club after 193 appearances and a late Allen strike sealed the win for the Naples side. And now the first Atlantic hurricane of 2020 has slammed into the coast of coronavirus-hit Texas, bringing heavy rains and potentially life-threatening flash flooding. The U.S. National Hurricane Center says the Category 1 storm packed winds of around 145 kilometers per hour as it hit Padre Island. It said the life-threatening storm surge can reach almost 2 meters with 45 centimeters of rain till Monday in South Texas and Mexico. Governor Greg Abbott issued a disaster declaration for 32 counties in Texas that are in the storm's path. Abbott said the twister was sweeping through the most affected area in the state for COVID-19, making matters even worse.
The most important thing I could say today is to issue a reminder to everybody in the state of Texas that just because a hurricane comes to the state does not mean that COVID-19 disappears. We cannot allow this hurricane to lead to a more catastrophically deadly event by stoking additional spread of COVID-19 that could lead to fatalities.
And now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.